We're going to build a paddleball game today. To start off, we're going to create a new project. I'm just going to start with a new empty project. When this comes up, we're just going to set our window size to the same as our layout size. If you click on the background, you'll pull up the layout properties. I'm going to change my layout size to be 720 by 480, but really any size that you want is fine. Down here you'll see project properties, click view there, and then you'll get the window size. Just make sure those two numbers match because this is going to be a single screen game. To add new things to the layout, I normally just double click the background. You get the insert new object dialog. I'm going to choose the sprite object and insert that. Then you'll get a pointer. This is where you click to decide where you're going to place that object. Doesn't really matter where you place it because you can move it afterwards. So I'm going to click here. And then you get an image editor come up. You can either design a sprite here or open a picture of something you've created in another program. So I'm going to open up an image. I'm going to load this paddle image that I've prepared. Then I'm going to close the sprite editor. And now I have my paddle on the screen. If I were to run this game now, nothing would happen. I would just have paddle that shows up on the screen. So to make my paddle do something, make sure you have your paddle selected first. Then under properties, go to behaviors. And then we're going to add some behaviors to our paddle. Go down to movements, and I'm going to select 8 direction movements. I'm going to add that to my paddle. Now when I run this, I'll be able to move my paddle left, right, up, down, and diagonally. Well, that's not exactly how I want my paddle to act, so I'm going to change a few things in my 8 direction behaviors. First, I'm going to go up to name, and I'm going to name my object paddle. If you just name everything sprite, you're going to have sprite, sprite 1, sprite 2, sprite 3, sprite 4. And then when you get down to the event sheet and start programming things, you're going to get confused as to what is what. So always make sure you name all of your objects. So under behaviors, I have my 8 direction options. For directions, I'm going to change this to left and right. And set angle is what allows this to rotate as I was changing directions. I don't want this to flip over and have different shading when I go left and right, so I'm going to change that to no. Now when I run this, I'll be able to just move left and right. And we'll see that I can go straight through the edge of the wall. So to fix that, I'm going to go back to behaviors, and I'm going to add the bound to layout behavior. By adding that behavior, when I run it, it will now be bound to the edge of the screen on both sides. We'll notice that the bound to layout behavior has the option to either be bound to the edge or to the origin. The origin, by default, is this middle part of the sprite. So if I were to change that to origin, like so, and I run this, then I'll be able to go halfway off the screen with my paddle in both directions. That's not how I want this to work, so I'm going to change that back to edge. I was just showing how that works. And I'm going to add one more thing. I'm going to make my paddle solid, and we'll see why here in just a minute. The next thing I'm going to add is another object. I'm going to double click on my background, add another sprite, add that right about here. I'm going to load another image. This time I'm going to load a ball, and I'm going to close my editor, and here's my ball. I'm going to add a behavior, but right after I name my object ball, and then the behavior I'm going to add is going to be the bullet movement, because my ball is just going to move in a straight line and not be controlled at all. So if I were to run that, it should just shoot straight off the right edge of the screen. So I'm going to go back to behaviors, and I'm going to tell it to be bound to the layout as well. Run that again, and now it's going to get stopped on the edge. So I'm going to go over to my properties, and where it says angle 0 degrees, I'm going to change that to 90 degrees. Now when I run that, it should run straight down toward my paddle. Now I've just got to tell it to bounce off of the paddle. Now you'll notice on bullet behaviors that there is actually a bounce off solids property here. And since we made our paddle solid, if I change that to yes, I can run that, and now that will just bounce off my paddle. But that doesn't work on the edge of my screen, so I'm going to need to create some walls. So I'm going to insert another sprite, load another image for my wall, close my image editor, name my object wall. And instead of copying and pasting this 100 times, I'm just going to resize this sprite. But first I'm going to go up to view, And I'm going to change snap to grid and show grid to on, and I'm going to change those both to 16. You'll notice that sometimes this does not take the first time, so if you toggle show grid off and then back on, it usually gets both numbers that way. Now when I move this, you'll see that it snaps to the grid. So I'm going to go up to the top left corner, and then I'm going to resize that to make it take up the screen. Now I only want one object type, so I don't have to do the same thing for 4 different walls. So I'm going to copy and paste that, so you can do copy, paste, and then place it somewhere. Or alternatively, you can hold down the control key and drag it, and it'll make a copy. And I'm going to rotate this. If you hold the shift key while you're rotating it, it will snap to certain angles. So I can get this to go straight up and down. Drag that to my edge. The size doesn't particularly matter as long as there's no gaps. And then I'm going to duplicate one of those by holding control and dragging it over. Now all I've got to do is take my wall object, go to behaviors, and add the solid behavior. Make sure my paddle is not stuck inside the wall. And now it should be able to bounce off of the paddle and the walls.